word good, and good is an abstract word. It means different things to different people depending upon where you live in this world. I know in America we use the same words to describe soup as we do to describe God. I love chicken soup. I love God. Chicken soup is good. God is good all the time. Okay? So we use the same words. And so we wonder why our culture is a little confused about religious subjects. And boy, are we confused about religious subjects. But the concept of Tov in Hebrew means something is completed for its purpose. In other words, when he was done doing all the things he did that day, he did them just exactly the way they should be done. He did them perfect. Deuteronomy 32:4. My work is perfect. That's the Father's way of saying, leave it alone. And if you leave it alone, it will do what it's designed to do. If you mess with it some along the way, if you mutate it and tweak it and corrupt it, then you create a mutation. And that mutation will begin to multiply after itself, and pretty soon the last generation recognizes the mutation. Nobody recognizes the original anymore. And that's why the book of Jeremiah can say, or the book of Hosea can say, the nations will look at the Torah and they will say it is a very strange thing. Why? Because they only recognize the mutation. They don't recognize what things used to look like. We've done the same thing with corn. Susie and Larry, who made me dinner tonight, okay, had some corn we knew was good, okay? Most corn in the scripture is already in this scripture. I made up a whole new word. It's a sniglet from the Saturday Night Live days. It's a corrupture. We live in this corrupture. But I'm going to propose to you that most of us have been eating genetically modified corn and wheat, particularly what's growing in the field, for so long, I don't think we'd ever recognize what corn used to taste like anymore. Or wheat, or whatever. Because we're so used to the mutation. But the Father said the end is revealed out of the beginning. 7 times in the book of Isaiah he said that. That's his way of saying, hey man, you want to know what's going on in the end? Go to the beginning. And so if you mess up the beginning, you mess up the end. And so when things are all corrupted, no wonder we got 50 different views of end-time prophecy and eschatology, is because along the way we've added things and we've taken things away. Now we're going to see a little bit later what happens if you take a DNA strand and you add a letter or switch just one little letter. There's gazillions of them there. We're just going to change one little letter. So forth. It's always amazing to me that people talk about the genetics and so forth of the DNA of an ape. Oh, how close the DNA of an ape is to a man. How close the complexity of the genetic structure of an ape is to man. And that's why we come from apes, because the complexity of their genetics is so close. But even the people who work in the field don't understand that you can be that close and still be way off, okay? And so we'll get into that a little bit later. I started to get into something. I go, no, Brad, you're getting ahead of yourself. But you guys are the guinea bovines, so you just have to go through this, okay? The days of a tree. Moving on, we get this thing to work. Yeshua is the seed. He's the root. He's the vine. He's the branch and the fruit. So Yeshua is all the parts of the tree. And we're going to trace these things in a second. However, the adversary imitates these things as well. Why? Well, just think of the parable of the wheat and the tares. The idea is the tares are sown in among the wheat. And as long as the wheat doesn't produce its fruit, it will look pretty much like a tare, and it's hard to tell the difference between the two. It's only when the wheat finally rises up and says, enough of this. I'm tired of all the religious bunk. It's time to go back to my roots. Time to go back to the ways of our Creator in the beginning. Start producing His fruit. And once that happens, now we know who the tares are. And so the whole idea is that He's also, let me give you some examples. According to Genesis 3:15, Yeshua is the seed of the woman, and the enmity is also a seed. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed, that would be the enmity, and her seed, or the seed of the woman. So the bad guy is represented by a seed, the good guy is represented by a seed. And some of you that know my teaching on the principle of the seed, those seeds in the parables, the most important parables according to Yeshua are identified as words. Words. There's a difference between the seed of woman and the seed of a man. There's a difference between the seed of the enmity and the seed of a man. Those are not the same things. That's why it's called the seed of man. So forth. But moving on, they're both represented by a seed. the root. According to Isaiah 11:10, Yeshua is the root of Jesse, which will stand for an instant from the people. But according to Deuteronomy 29:18, there be those among you who have a root that beareth gall and wormwood. So there's another root. So they're both seeds. They're both represented by roots. Yeshua, according to John 15:1, is the vine. But according to Jeremiah 2:21, there's a strange degenerate vine unto me. He didn't plant that. It turned into a strange degenerate plant. According to Jeremiah 23:5, Yeshua is the righteous branch. But according to Isaiah 14:19, the bad guy is an abominable branch. So he's imitating all the parts of the tree because that's what Yeshua is. Okay, Yeshua is represented by one natural tree. And we're going to see the meaning of the whole Romans 11 thing tomorrow. In that we have this natural tree. In biology, we call it a natural strand because on the DNA helix, there are two strands. Okay? And we'll see the reason why those two strands had to separate in order to produce one strand so we could produce the body of Messiah. Okay? And you'll see why all these things take place in your body in the process of producing life in your body, because that's how life is produced in His body. So life in our body is designed exactly the way the life in the body of Messiah is designed, and why the house of Israel had to separate from the house of Judah. Why that had to happen. Because if you ask anybody, why are there two strands? Ask a scientist. Ask a biologist. Why are there two strands on a DNA helix? To protect the DNA. To protect the DNA. You need two of them to protect it. Remember when Jacob sends a few of his men out to go get Esau? And then halfway there, here comes Esau with 400 guys. So what does Jacob do to protect himself? He divides the camp into two. Okay? We're going to see that constant pattern in Scripture as well. Is the fact that though men caused that to happen with their evil deeds or whatever, the reality is it had to happen in order to protect Israel in the first place. All those plans were designed to protect God's people in the first place. You even see it when you watch the old Westerns. Guys, remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a classic example. Butch and Sundance go into the town, and they go in with a bunch of their other buddies, and they rob the bank. And they run outside. As soon as they get outside of town, they split. And Butch and Sundance go one way, and all these guys go the other way. Why? It's harder to catch them. It's harder to get them all when they split up. Remember, Butch and Sundance keep going, who are those guys? Okay, if you remember the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Some of you are going, Brad, you watch too many movies, I think, okay? Okay, are we doing okay so far?
Yes.
I hate to sound like Rico. Okay. Well, let's do a little Rico. Okay, here's a little Rico. Lucy, Lucy, Lucy. Okay, let's go. This would work better, except the PowerPoint's not working so good. Okay. The fruit. Speaking of Mary and the child in her womb, you are blessed is the fruit of your womb. So Yeshua is called the fruit of Mary's womb. In Jude 12, these are spots in your feast of charity when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. So the fruit represents both the good guy and the bad guy. In Isaiah 14:29, rejoice not thou, whole Palestina. Now that word Palestina there, of course, is Palash in the Hebrew. Palash is going to be the root word for Palestina, for Philistines, for Palestinians. And this is a Hebrew word that means an invader or an illegal immigrant. The very nature of the meaning of the word is an invader. As a matter of fact, it's something that comes down into something and burrows. The word palash, in its ancient picture, is something that not only invades something else, it doesn't belong there. It's a tear among the wheat, but it burrows itself down into the ground. Okay, hides itself down into the ground. It says, because the rod of him that smote you is broken, for out of the serpent's root shall come forth, see, the serpent has a root, shall come forth a descendant of a serpent, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. So obviously, like kind produces like kind. Because if he's a descendant of a serpent, then what's he going to produce? A serpent. Because this is the way life is. Like kind produces like kind. Once again, that's why you can't get something from nothing. That's why when you look inside the genetic information of a frog, there's only frog information. There's no bird info. So according to evolutionary thinking, over time, a frog became a bird. If you just gave it enough time. But see, according to the evidence we have, which is what faith is, there's no bird information in the genetics of a frog. So you can't, unless what? Unless a human comes along and messes with it. Yeah, we can mess with it and create a mutation, but if you let frogs be frogs, they will always produce what? Frogs. That's the way it goes. And so God's children are only produced by His seed. You can't produce God's children with man's seed.
Amen.
I can't stress that enough. You can't produce God's children with man's seed. The only thing you can produce with man's seed is another man, and that's the problem. Right there. The problem is our blood. Our blood is the problem. His blood is the solution. That's the way it's been from day one. And so that is revealed not just in arguing over passages in the Bible, but seeing it growing in the fields and seeing it in your body as we learn more things about your body. Okay, now we've got 30 more minutes, right? Is everybody okay? I'm supposed to shut up at 9:30? Is that okay? Just want to make sure that I'm on course here. Isaiah 4:2, in that day shall the branch of Yahweh be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them that are escaped of Israel. Can you start to get, as if you didn't know already, some kind of idea that prophetic statements and flowers and trees and birds and things are all over the Bible? And that's just the words that say flowers and trees and branches and fruit. We're not even talking about the background of all the other words that you think are just theological terms, are all based on what? Birds and bees and flowers and trees, the natural things of creation in the beginning. Moving on. If we can get this, I don't know why it's doing this, but only part of it's showing up. So, look at this. There we go. The bottom shows up first. Isn't that, don't you love, I tell you what. So you'll be forewarned. If one day they find Bill Gates wrapped in a plastic bag in a ditch on the side of the road, you think to yourself, wow. That's all I want to say. That could put me in big trouble. But if I ever see the man, I will slay him on the spot. You know how hard it is, difficult to call someone and say, hey, how in the middle of a live presentation on a PowerPoint presentation on TV do I get you to stop putting out virus warnings? Okay? I've been on live TV before using PowerPoint, and these things come up. And you just want to... Okay. Okay, some of you know that bees, the word for bees is the same word for word. It's the same parent roots. Because bees point to the source of nectar, and that's what devar means, is to point to the source of where your nutrition or your food comes from. Everything that takes for you to survive is embedded in this word devar, or word. Just like everything the bee needs to survive is in the nectar of the flower. And so that's the reason why bees, as some of you know this already, bees and word are the same thing. And they do this fantastic little dance, which I'm not going to do because I just got healed. Okay? Hallelujah. Okay. I feel like one of those people I see on Peter Popoff. Okay, never mind. Okay. So Rosh, even Rosh is translated as the head of a man, but it's an agricultural term. Rosh actually comes from agriculture. We use it to describe our body because the head, of course, is what's on our body. But it's actually the head, the fruit of a plant. When a plant produces a whole lot of fruit, gets a big head of fruit on it, that's actually where the word comes from, is in a harvest. It says, actually, this is the actual name for what we kind of erroneously call the Feast of First Fruits. The Feast of First Fruits in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 10, is because First Fruits actually is Bikurim. Okay, that is actually the Feast of First Fruits, which is actually what the Feast of Weeks is called. Bikurim. Okay? Actually, this thing that we understand is the feast when they waved the sheaves and Yeshua rose from the dead is called Reshit Ketzrakem. Okay? Reshit Ketzrakem. Head of the harvest is what it's technically called. Head or the first of the harvest. So the idea of Reshit. So this is, you just take the bet off this. This is the first word in Genesis. Reshit. So forth. Language, by the way, is diagrammed by trees, and each language is a branch. So it's no coincidence that we use the same thing to show where language comes from, that we show where people come from. As a matter of fact, those who are working on the body, chiropractors and so forth, and I know the backbone is called the tree. They call it the tree. And if you know any chiropractors, and I know several because of things that have happened over time or whatever, that's the reason why they deal with a lot of other things that they don't have anything to do with the bones, because they hang off the tree. They say they hang off the branches of the tree. And of course, the word for backbone, okay, is etzem, okay, which contains the word tree. So the Hebrew word for your backbone actually contains the word for a tree. I'm sure some of you already knew that anyway. Molecular biology and even in wireless data terms, they use the tree to describe the backbone of the computer systems and so forth as well. And so some of you are familiar with this. This obviously is a language tree. The only one that I can find that I had time, because I just put this together in the last week, the only one I had time to do is one that begins with an Indo-European background, which I do not believe in, but at least they start out with something called the mother tongue. There it is down there at the bottom. Okay, mother tongue. So they're not saying that Indo-European is the mother tongue. I was shocked, because most linguists still believe that the mother tongue was an Indo-European Sanskrit language that was something that migrated from India up to Europe. That's why they call it Indo-European. But I'm going to suggest to you that is a white man's ploy. I just put it that way. That's a white man's idea. Yeah, the white guys that head up a lot of these things and so forth, they have a lot of trouble, tracing things back to dark-skinned people. They just don't like that idea. Okay? In other words, the melanin that people have in our skin somehow determines people's worth. How stupid can you possibly be? But that's what we do with people. And so they've got it started out with some sort of European. In other words, the white people started it out and so forth. And there's no way that could be true, by the way. There's no way that could be true. That's a matter of genetics too, and we don't have time to get into that. Okay, let's moving on. And this is called a family tree. So the family tree is designed just like the language tree is. You put your families on there and you trace it from the very beginning. So it's not a coincidence we use those same terms. Morphology. Maybe some of you are familiar with morphology. Morphology is the study of the breakdown of words. So when we do morphology on a word, we break it down into its smallest parts. Why? To help us to understand what the whole means, you break it down to the parts. The same thing is true when someone's passed away. And if it's under, peculiar circumstances or something, they do an autopsy. And when they do the autopsy, they're doing the morphology on that person. They break down the biological functions of the flesh. Why? Because they can understand, if they can look at the small parts, they can understand the whole. This is the reason why when we take these words back to their roots, that's the reason why that's so important, because the smaller parts are going to be in the natural, my friends, where the whole is generally going to be in the abstract. Am I making sense? The whole is generally going to be in the abstract, like mercy, compassion. So we take the whole word compassion, which is an abstract word, meaning what? Meaning it isn't evil. It even necessarily isn't mistranslated. I think that's some things that people misunderstand about my ministry, because I get this a lot from various people about the difference, which we won't have time to talk about, but the difference between pictograms, ideograms, and phonograms. Okay? Now, because that's the big argument among languages in the world. Because people believe that languages, the little pictures that they have in Hebrew, aren't designed for you to see an idea or a picture of something, but rather to get you to say the sound. That's called a phonogram. And so there's some linguists out there that say, no, all words are